Hello, I'm Mishka, and this channel is the Helsinki Renaissance, where we will be talking about arts and culture in hopefully a fresh and interesting manner. Um, anyway, a couple of days ago, um, I happened to see uh, in a YouTube video a certain I think it was Chicago-based street musician who was, uh, playing acoustic guitar in, I don't know, some sort of a metro station, and uh, and I usually don't care when um, there are the kind of YouTube videos of OMG, check out this awesome cover that like some people get very hyped up about some acoustic covers. I usually don't care. Usually don't care because like there are some cover bands or tribute bands that they don't necessarily sound as good as the original, but they sound like, if you're not being too demanding, they're almost like the real ticket. So anyway, it's just, the idea of somebody being like a tribute band, it's just like, I'm in no way interested. Just because something sounds more or less good. But anyway, I guess I was just not inspired by anything else, or alternatively, the promise of a Fleetwood Mac cover just slightly piqued my interest. So I decided to watch this allegedly amazing, street musician performance of Fleetwood Mac's Landslide. And I have to say that I actually do consider that performance better than the original. And I never say that a cover is better than the original. Like, when Joe Cocker, when he was doing the Mad Dogs and Englishmen performances, I think a lot of those covers were like, Joe Cocker, he just put such a, massive groove machine there on the stage that his covers of, say, some Lovin' Spoonful or Leonard Cohen songs, I think I'd have to say that those are better than the original. I mean, like, some people don't like me saying it, but like, to me, for instance, the Joe Cocker version of The Letter, for instance, to me, that's the only version of that song. Some people don't like me saying it, but that's just how I feel. There's like the most ideal live recording you could possibly have with the Mad Dogs and Englishmen version, where to me, it captures just the right sound. That everything that's good about live music is captured in those Mad Dogs and Englishmen. I think they did 2 shows that they recorded and then chose the best cuts for the album. But anyway, like, very rarely do I rate a cover higher because you know, like if you contrast something like David Bowie's Criminal World out of Let's Dance, if you contrast it the original by Metro, like Bowie just makes the most minimal changes. Like it's basically the same song. You know, you have the singer changed obviously, and you have like does Stevie Ray Vaughan play guitar over the track? So that like you have some supplementary uh, like Stevie Ray Vaughan leaks over it, but like it's basically the same song. I don't know how anyone could say that it's obvious that the Bowie version is better. Like I remember Tony Visconti saying on the audio commentary track of the Ziggy Stardust movie that he considers that the Bowie version of Let's Spend the Night Together is better, which to me sounds like such a bizarre statement because the jaunty piano that I think is there in the Rolling Stone original, to me that type of levity in the original is like what saves it. But I guess some people could like sort of some people say that Bowie's version is better. Although again, I can't understand like I don't understand how anyone could feel that way. Uh, you know, I don't have anything against Tony Visconti. I just can't understand where he's coming from with that. So to me, the Rolling Stone original is obviously better, and with most covers, I think that the original, uh, lots of covers. I think there's basically two kinds of covers. Like some covers, they change nothing and they're rendered rather superfluous. So the main group that the Bowie cover of like Criminal World appeals to is the people who've never heard of the original. So like covers that change nothing, like on some level should be rendered superfluous. And then the covers that change everything basically, they're just rendered somewhat gimmicky. So that in both of the main alternatives, I think that the covers basically end up looking not super appealing. Uh, but but then there's the rare kind of cover where like it's as if there's something like when a cover gets it just right, it can render the original to look almost like a demo. And I think that with this performance that I saw of the street musician of Fleetwood Mac's Landslide, like I love the Christine McVie original, all right? It's not a question of me not appreciating the original, but how this street musician, who apparently goes by the name of Slim, and I think her real name is Ashley Stevenson, like the Ashley Stevenson version, it just she changed the rhythmic core of the song, which like was almost mind blowing to hear the sort of funkier version of Landslide. Like she changes the rhythmic nature of it, but then her delivery is just so much more powerful that the original ends up sounding like a demo. Like I've heard some Fleetwood Mac demos of like songs like Silver Springs, for instance, where like you know it's sort of it's you know good-ish, but it just seems like it's somehow lacking. And then like just the vastly more dynamic performance that Ashley Stevenson did. By the way, like if we're talking about live versions, like I've seen like I also heard like a studio version by Ashley Stevenson, which didn't sound half as good as the live version. So that like I think that a lot of live performance end up being just like sloppier versions of the studio versions. But I think that in this particular instance, the live thing just created everything that was special about the cover. And so I don't know if I'd prefer the Ashley Stevenson's studio cover of Landslide to the live cover of Landslide, but you know, I'm just putting it out there that um, I'm not just uploading the changes. Like, I'm not uploading changing something for the sake of changing something, but I mean, this cover was it was amazing. So anyway, like then I just kept wondering that well, like, was it a bit of a fluke that you know, like, okay, it was a great individual performance, but like uh, well, um, one swallow does not make a spring, as the saying goes. So anyway, then I kept trying to search for other performances by her as well, and then when I found a cover she had of a Prince song called "When Doves Cry," and when I seriously contemplated on the thought about whether her version of "When Doves Cry," whether it was better than the original, I just had to so hit the brakes. Just thinking that wait. I mean, like, this can't be happening, right? Now, to me, it's sort of less clear cut whether I actually think that Slim's version of When Doves Cry, whether it would be better than the original. Like, I'd say that probably not. That, if I heard both versions, if I had to hear both versions multiple times, I think that the novelty in the cover would wear off and the original would look better. Like, the original would still stand strong, and the cover would look slight in comparison. But like, again, it's a cover that changes quite a bit with the original, and I think that those changes sort of like she finds a way to make them work, so that even if the When Doves Cry wouldn't be better than the original, I think that it's certainly like a triumphant version that I'm sure Prince would appreciate if he would have heard it. But anyway, then the thoughts that I next had about this somewhat surreal episode is that the question is that how is it possible that she's a street musician if she could conceivably outperform a lot of professional musicians? Well, I mean, the obvious thought is that well, I mean, part of the truth is that the music industries are so crassly commercial that they mostly like boy bands and Barbie dolls, and then maybe some some rap stars and a few rock and roll people, and just to have the kind of Beverly Hills 90210 type landscape to the culture, so that the music industry basically rejects the musicians who aren't particularly Melrose Place-esque, so that you have to be some sort of a cartoon outlaw or some sort of a Barbie doll for the mainstream music industries to feel fine about processing new talents, and everyone who doesn't fit in with a Melrose Place type mentality is sort of rejected. And I suppose Slim is somewhat suffering from her I guess in the parlance of our times, like people say that she's too real to exist in a phony world, which certainly the media landscape today is. So anyway, like some people would sort of get kind of there's that whining about oh, it's unfair that Paris Hilton has a record contract, but Slim doesn't, or something. But you know, like to me, that's the wrong thing to whine about, because like the reason why there's an alternative sphere to the mainstream is that the people who don't want to support the Melrose Place type art scene then should have the alternative sector and the indie sector and the highbrow art scenes to go for. But then the problem is that you know, it's obvious enough that the record companies that mostly have the kind of Britney Spears and I don't know, like those kinds of top 40 artists. Like the record companies that have those, it shouldn't be surprising anyone that Slim wouldn't be picked by those. But then when there's the kind of reality that some artists, they're rejected alike by both the mainstream and the alternative spheres, then the real problem happens, is that our alternative are the alternative sectors only like a bizarre version of the Melrose Place mentality? Is that you know, the artists who get picked up by all the museums of modern art and indie distributors and so on, like is the structure basically the same as with a Melrose Place type media houses, in that they just like some alternative sectors, they just have the kind of cartoonish freak show that they're putting out there, but it's like the content is just as vacant as with the mainstream, and you know, it's everything's as disposable and everything's everything's done with the same kind of pathetic calculations and avoidance of any risk taking as with the mainstream houses. It's just that there's like a superficial difference between the mainstream and the alternative and the indie sectors. But basically, like, artists have the same experiences with the indie distributors as they have with the mainstream distributors, in that you know, it's just superficial reasoning that either is a make or break point with them. So you know, it's just worth wondering whether people don't complain about the right things when they're complaining about, oh, insert artist isn't getting a fair deal. You know, it's there's a widespread lack of competence in a lot of these industries, and you know, like I'd say that under normal circumstances, like if I were to compare Ashley Stevenson or Slim to some artists who had made it, I think that the people who were putting Tracy Chapman comparisons, I think that just shows a certain faultiness in people's expectations, because Tracy Chapman actually was, you know, a multi-platinum selling artist. So comparing somebody to Tracy Chapman would be a bit like, you know, comparing somebody to Lauryn Hill or something. Like it's unrealistic, and it's also just a misnomer because Tracy Chapman was a singer-songwriter, so she was more like coming from a tradition of like Bob Dylan or something than the tradition of I don't know, Motown artists or something who weren't really singer-songwriters. Anyway, like I just think that the better comparison point would be a singer called Cassandra Wilson, who I would imagine that most people haven't heard of. And unlike Tracy Chapman, Cassandra Wilson certainly is not a multi-platinum selling artist. She's a singer with a very powerful voice who has done a lot of cover versions. So that like maybe you could see that Cassandra Wilson would be like the version of Nina Simone that no one just ever heard about. So the only reason that I have heard of Cassandra Wilson is because there's a Wong Kar-wai film called My Blueberry Nights, which wasn't particularly well reviewed when it came out, and even Wong Kar-wai fans didn't really like that movie. But there was one there was one moment that was almost like from the golden period of his movies, where a Cassandra Wilson cover of Neil Young's Harvest Moon was playing in the background. And I don't want to say that that cover is better than the original, but certainly that cover is almost as good as the original. I heard it in that movie, and well, that's how I have heard of Cassandra Wilson. So just like Nina Simone covers some Beatles songs and some Rolling Stones songs in some parts of her career when she wasn't just singing the jazz standards of the Great American Songbook. So like Cassandra Wilson, she has some covers of some rock songs, and Harvest Moon is one of them. I guess she's able to sort of hang in there with her musical career, but certainly, it's there isn't that booming a market for like classy covers of old rock songs, so that like I'd say that the people who project that Ashley Stevenson should have the kind of multi-platinum career of like Tracy Chapman, well, I mean, that's like no record company clearly thinks that, and I think that there's sort of legitimate reasons not to think that. I mean, like that projection wouldn't be based on anything there's no reason to make that projection. I mean, it's just wishful thinking. So that the Cassandra Wilson career would probably be more realistic. However, I would still say that the way that I mean, sometimes like the industry just says that sometimes the singer just has the X factor about them, and like people can't entirely say why it is that one singer feels more special than another. But like I'd say that Ashley Stevenson, she still could sort of like I'd say that her career should be the kind of wild card that I wouldn't dismiss it without trying it first. So that I'd certainly say that the record companies who would take it for granted that it couldn't be a good investment. I certainly think that history should prove such assumptions wrong, and that sometimes you just have to try and see what would happen with a career. And I think that some of the performance that Slim had, they would be so good that I would basically say that I mean, like a smaller record company would have to be crazy to turn her down, but yet they're doing it. What this mostly reminds me of is that during a certain period of 19th century Paris, when Edward Manet was, he was a somewhat well-to-do gentleman, so he could afford to, start doing modernist painting in his spare time, because as an affluent gentleman, he would have a lot of spare time. Manet, he was investing his time into his modernist paintings, which was a movement that I guess people later started calling it Impressionism, what people were doing. I don't think Manet is, he's not the most obvious sample of Impressionism, but I suppose people were sort of thinking that he was sort of adjacent to the movement, the way that somebody like Agnes Varda, even though she wasn't like necessarily obviously a new wave director, it was still like because she was happening alongside the new wave movement, that because she was more or less from a comparable distance from the mainstream of French cinema, people just called her a new wave director, even though like there could be a bit more of a debate about would she be or would she not be. But anyway, I'd say that let's say for the sake of argument that there's nothing complicated about Monet being an impressionist painter and that he is one. So anyway, Impressionism it started getting practiced by some painters who were rejected by the official mainstream of French painting. And I'd say that the art movement that should have been reigning before Impressionism came along and Modernism started establishing itself is that I'd say that Romanticism, like the Romantic movement, it should have been the dominant art movement. However, by the time that you start getting into the 1860s, I think that Romanticism had already basically played itself out. So that there would be some figures like Charles Baudelaire, who, some people treat him as the first modernist, but really he should be treated as the last romantic. Anyway, I'd say that Romanticism definitely didn't go on after the figures like Baudelaire, and there was just a shift to modernity after that. Somebody could think that the arts establishment was into Romanticism, but I don't think that's at all true. Probably they just had kind of this retooled versions of neoclassicism, where it's just people weren't doing neoclassicism the way that somebody like Jacques Louis David would have been doing neoclassicism, but people just in Great Britain there formed a movement that was comparable to the Impressionists, called the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So basically, really quickly explained, what the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood mean is that first there was painting that people didn't like during the Middle Ages. Then there was the Italian Renaissance, and Italian Renaissance thought that Middle Ages did painting wrong, and Renaissance wanted to do painting right. And then art theories about competent painting started being formed, and then Renaissance turned into like High Renaissance when people had mastered the artistic theories of the Renaissance, and Raphael was seen as the greatest painter of the High Renaissance. So that basically Raphael's status as the greatest painter of all time was unquestioned for some centuries. And so what happened is that Raphael started having as if disciples, so that these disciples could be referred as Raphaelites, just like Franciscan monks were like monks following Saint Francis, like Raphaelites were followers of Raphael the painter. And even though the High Renaissance died out, the aesthetic core of the High Renaissance more or less stayed with the kind of academicians of the world. So even though when Mannerism and Baroque and Neoclassicism and Romanticism, artists started moving elsewhere, but the Raphaelites of the academicians, so like the teachers of the world and some of the critics of the world, they were holding on to the High Renaissance of Raphael. So they were still Raphaelites. The Raphaelites weren't painters, like Raphaelites weren't leading painters. The leading artists of a given period were doing something else, but the teachers as if were holding on to High Renaissance in one form or another. And so what the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood started rebelling against is that they didn't want to be told by teachers about what they should do, so that they started looking towards the art scene before High Renaissance, and they started having this kind of false or like an admiration to the Middle Ages that didn't have anything too much to do with facts. So that the arts of Middle Ages and the arts of like early Renaissance, they were seen as like some period of great freedom, and that the kind of limited abilities of the painters of those eras were elevated into some brilliant position. But anyway, just for whatever reason, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, they just thought that art before the Renaissance was freer, and they wanted to do things unshackled by the artistic conventions of the High Renaissance. And basically the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, they wanted the right to not be competent. So that if a painter wanted to avoid High Renaissance concept of competence, a painter should be allowed to do it. So anyway, the only reason that I'm bringing up the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood is that you see that even though the artist mainstream had moved away from neoclassicism, like clearly neoclassicism, which like the High Renaissance Raphaelite tendency, that should be the neoclassical core. So anyway, like even though the arts mainstream had moved away from neoclassicism, the academicians and the critics were holding on to neoclassicism. Like you see that they did, because if they didn't, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood would have had nothing to rebel against, and yet they did, because like neoclassicism was still going strong in society. And anyway, like it was happening in Britain and it was happening everywhere in Europe. And the Impressionists were hitting a wall with the neoclassicists, just as well as the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. So even though the PRB and the Impressionists, they had different ambitions, they were alike in rejecting the mainstream. And the establishment mainstream was actually still arguably a neoclassical one, even though the period wasn't officially seen as a neoclassical period, but like it's explainable by academicians being like very much behind the curve. But anyway, like the Impressionists were being denied competence because they weren't Raphaelites, basically. So because the Impressionists refused to paint the way that the disciples of Raphael were teaching people to paint, then the arts establishment said that the Impressionists are painting wrong, and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood that they're painting wrong because they don't want to conform to the mode of competence established by the so-called Raphaelites of the world, which I'd rather call neoclassical academicians. Anyway, one episode that the Impressionists had when they were fighting against the neoclassical academicians of the arts establishment, and there was a fight about who gets to decide what's competent, and the artists were saying that we have this self-important, teachers and critics who they're not doing anything, and yet they act like they're the only people who know anything. So like this kind of protest started forming, that they had like an official painters exhibition in 1 year during, was it the 1870s or something, and Edward Manet was denied access to the official painting exhibition because the jury of the exhibition said that Manet wasn't good enough. Like he would have nothing that Manet would have nothing worthwhile to show to people. And so many painters were denied access to the official arts exposition that there were widespread protests. And in an uncharacteristically ingenious move, people decided to put this, what they call Salon des Refusés, so that there was an official exhibition of every painting that was turned down by the jury. So that there were two exhibitions, the jury's exhibition and the everybody else's exhibition. And there was a situation that you could conceivably say that the Salon des Refusés, which you wouldn't say that it was all Impressionists, but you'd probably say that it was all people who weren't neoclassicists. But anyway, like you could say that the Salon des Refusés, it had a higher quality to it than the official Salon. And I think that what's happening, like this is just my own private theory, is that if we had the kind of situation that we'd have a Salon des Refusés alternative, I think what would happen is that a lot of the screenwriters who Hollywood turns down, like Charlie Kaufman, for instance, he certainly didn't immediately get the green light. Like there are, like a lot of the screenwriters who Hollywood turns down, I think that it would be seen that they have higher competence than the screenwriters who Hollywood embraces if there was a situation where like the people could go to both the official Salon and the Salon des Refusés. I'd say that with lots of people, like that doesn't just happen to Hollywood, but like I'd say that in all art forms, that if there was a Salon des Refusés where people could go and just see for themselves about the screenwriters, the guitar, the singer-songwriters, the painters, the sculptors, the film directors, the novelists, and so on. I think you could conceivably have a situation that the Salon de Refusés side of tracks actually has a higher competence than the official Salon, because the industry basically just voluntarily dumbs itself down because it's easier to market something that is sort of intentionally kept small enough that it's easily comprehensible to anyone. So that the lowest common denominator stuff keeps the industries dumbing themselves down, and it could conceivably create a kind of situation that actually the Salon de Refusés, that the unemployed people would have higher competence than the employed people. And that's a somewhat controversial claim, because obviously there are some directors like Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino who people think that they have quite a bit of competence. And just the idea that could the outcasts possibly have enough comparable figures that they could have a higher degree of competence. And I am saying that because of every industry's innate tradition of dumbing itself down to fit the lowest common denominator box, because of that, I'm saying that in every situation, the Salon de Refusés would have more talent than the official mainstream. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that if the sample sizes are just large enough, that the Salon de Refusés would always have more competence than the official mainstream. Because even though there might be some dumb people in the Salon de Refusés, there wouldn't be any glass ceiling put to them. Like if the mainstream sort of tries to make everyone into either a cartoon outlaw or a Barbie doll, like it's as if they're like boxing artists into being just one thing. But there's like the kind of more unbridled freedom in the Salon de Refusés. So that I'm saying that in every instance where the pools are large enough, the Salon de Refusés always has more competence than the mainstream salon. And very few people, I think, would co-sign this. But anyway, just ask yourself, if Edward Manet essentially was at a given time an amateur painter, who would basically devote their life to painting and have nothing to show for it? To me it seems like there are some situations that amateurs are being laughed out of the building, but what makes some hack painter who gets commissions to paint the portrait of some prime minister or something, or some banker, what makes some sort of a hack painter better than Manet just because he gets commissions? Manet, he gave his life to painting, more or less. He got impressive skills to show for it. Now, obviously, Manet's his ability to design was somewhat compromised, so that he couldn't actually really do his own compositions. A lot of his most famous paintings are him basically redoing a pre-existing composition, because his abilities with what the Italians call disegno, he wasn't really that good at compositions, but that's a slight blemish on his overall creativity. It would be like a musician who just doesn't know how to read sheet music, but they still know how to play instruments. Anyway, some of the academicians, they would have think that the position is strong and they can just laugh at Manet because he's an amateur. But really, I mean, there are lots of these people who they give their whole life to some of these disciplines. And it's just that they haven't happened to be picked up. But like, why would anyone take it for granted that Kristin McVie has superior talent than Ashley Stevenson? I don't want to pit them against one another. And certainly Kristin McVie has an edge because she's a singer-songwriter, so that her own compositions should give her the edge over somebody doing cover versions. But just saying that I haven't personally heard any Ashley Stevenson original compositions, and also she still has years to develop. But just saying that like the people who the most quickly jump into conclusions that Ashley Stevenson cannot possibly be as good as Kristin McVie or Prince, who did the originals, and she's just doing covers as a straight musician. I'd say that Prince certainly is nobody's idea of like your average professional musician, and neither is Kristin McVie. Anyway, like if like there would be people like Prince and Kristin McVie to make up the official Salon a bit better, I'd say that the people like Ashley Stevenson in the Salon des Refusés, I would say that people have seen Kristin McVie's full creativity in a completely different way that they've seen, say, Ashley Stevenson. So that I'd say that even though like some people might think that there's no way in hell that the Salon des Refusés could possibly have superior talent to the main branch, so that there's a situation that there's like a pool of artists, and the official Salon can choose everyone they want. So that it'd be like a fantasy sports draft that the official Salon gets to have everyone they want. If they want Eric Clapton, if they want Paul McCartney, if they want Jimi Hendrix, if they want Mozart, Beethoven, whatever, they can have all of them. And then it's just the leftovers for the Salon des Refusés. But what I'm saying is that let's say that there's a composer in Venezuela who writes piano concertos in their free time, for instance. It's just we're not being admitted to their full creativity with the same kind of way that we are admitted to Beethoven's full creativity. And again, like people might say that, oh, well, Beethoven, enough said, the official Salon must win. I would say that there are individual players, like individual artists like Beethoven or Mozart or Bach, who are just such transcendent talents that what you have to remember is that they are exceptional because they are just that, they are an exception. Like most professional musicians aren't like Beethoven. And like Beethoven, his own genius, like it cannot single-handedly save all of the brain-dead pap that some of the tin panelists keep cranking out. So that yes, you have Beethoven in the official Salon, but you also have all of the Disney Mouseketeers who keep doing baby love songs about the person they just meant to have ice cream with, they're gonna love them till the end of time, and it's sunshine forevermore, like those kinds of songs. Like I'm pretty sure that lots of amateurs would be able to do those without too many difficulties. So that there's the kind of situation that the official sphere would have the kind of people like Beethoven, Prince, Mozart, Michael Jackson, and that they would be such a tiny portion of the official Salon who are the bulk of the impressiveness. And then the only prayer that the Salon des Refusés could have to compete against the mainstream is that if there would just be so many like just so many amateur artists who um, are there to keep that so many amateur artists contribute that the amateur sphere isn't top heavy the way that the official salon would be top heavy. That they put all of their faith in that people like Beethoven and Prince would just have so much talent that everyone gets to ride on their coattails essentially, and that some of the timpanelli, baby love singers like they would as if be superfluous in the overall situation, and just you'd basically just make it all about the elite, and then you'd contrast that elite against the Salon de Refusés, and just wonder about just how many amateur musicians out there, and can their collective power match that elites superior abilities? Because I'm sure that no one thinks that there are amateur musicians who are more talented than Mozart and Beethoven. Like, surely that's not the case. But then the question is that whatever quality Beethoven is doing, could a million amateur musicians combined put comparable talent out there? And again, I said that this is controversial, and lots of people wouldn't be willing to okay this. But when I was in junior high, I was friends with a lot of guitarists who, you could argue that they were already as good as the guitar players that they were, taking after. So that there were these like teenagers in Finland who would be playing like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest songs, and there would be some instances where they would improvise guitar solos that could conceivably, by the way, we were in junior high school, mind you, and there would be the kind of instances that those guitar players could already have caught up with their idols, essentially. In that there's a situation that Steve Harris of Iron Maiden, for instance, maybe he'd be a better songwriter than some of my friends and acquaintances, but that excluded, just as far as the musicianship is concerned, some of you people, you don't know just how good some of those amateur musicians are. Just like you don't know how good Ashley Stevenson is if you haven't heard her. It would never occur to you that her performance of Landslide could possibly be better than Christine McVie's performance, and yet I'm saying that it is. And I'm saying that there are so many people who could put a better performance than the supposedly untouchable excellence of the professionals, and that if in my own personal acquaintance that I would have known multiple young guitar players who essentially were good enough to play through the heavy metal shredding, and again, we were in junior high, we were rather young, so that if that's the starting point, and you can keep developing, your songwriting if you just get the right culture around you and so on. So I'm saying that there are potentially millions of people who would have the requisite jobs. It's just they're all categorically ignored because they are amateurs. And I'm saying that the people, it's almost like a, well, I don't want to make it about who's right and who's wrong, but I'm just saying that well, like people are definitely sleeping on the amateur scene. To use a modern expression, in that just like Ashley Stevenson has way more talent than what people recognize. There are so many people who have way more talent than some people recognize. And obviously, right now, I would be part of those Salon de Refusés crowd, just like Edward Manet was. And there are quite a few artists who, like Edward Manet, he started out with the Salon de Refusés, and gradually he was like people were begrudgingly admitting him to the official salon. And there are the kind of situations that since the professional sphere, they can pick everyone they want, theoretically, so that they can keep drafting the greatest talents of the amateur sphere, and they should be able to tip the balance into their favor. But I'm actually saying that in all instances, like even when the amateur sphere cannot be top heavy, because the amateur sphere loses all of its talent to the mainstream sphere eventually. I'm saying that in all instances, the Salon de Refusés always has superior talent than the official salon. It's just a theory that I've developed, and there's this kind of power in numbers situation in that Shakespeare had something like 120 sonnets, or I can't remember the precise number, but let's just say that 20 of those were great. Like if we have 1 million amateur poets who start writing sonnets, like they can come up with more great sonnets than what Shakespeare has. So like I'm saying that the size of the amateur sphere is bigger than what people realize, and the talent levels of people who devote their whole lives to a discipline, those talents are bigger than what people realize. So that there are these kind of situations where like some people like Ashley Stevenson and I dare say even myself, we definitely have something more than what the industries are willing to recognize. And it's just that some people, because they can't fit with the Melrose Place mentality of the mainstream media houses, they are, due to some fairly dubious reasoning, left out, even though like money could be made with the product, but the industries have just dumped themselves down to such extents that they can't even understand a good opportunity when it's staring them in the face. So that even though the industries, they should have every option of being better than the amateur sphere, I'm saying that the amateur sphere will always have superior overall talent than the mainstream sphere. And well, that's my controversial claim. And even if I'll get picked to the professional sphere, I'll still state this as a general law that the amateur guitarists will have superior abilities to the professional guitarist. It sounds paradoxical, but well, like if 100 people study something and 5 of them can have a profession doing it, it's just that you compare the elite 5 to the 95 others, and I'm saying that the 95 others will win. But anyway, that's my artistic theory, and anyway, I hope some people will check out Ashley Stevenson, because her performance certainly were worthy of an audience. But anyway, I hope my monologue was also worthy of something. But now it ends. So I thank you for watching, and bye bye for now.